Hello, everybody. Welcome to Then It Was a Game. I'm John Horrigan, and today I'm joined by a sports writer revered in New England from the Eagle Tribune, Mr. Bill Burt. Bill, how are you?
Thanks. I appreciate the revered. The only revere I know is the one on the ocean up in North Boston. But, appreciate it. Thank you.
Today, Bill, we're going to talk about the 1986 Boston Red Sox, from spring training to the World Series. Folks of our age went through that, had our hearts literally ripped from our chests over that. There's been a lot of blame. We're going to look into that. But yeah, exactly. And what do they used to say? They came for my grandfather and my father, and now they're coming for me, right, or something to that effect. So I want to talk about the 1986 Red Sox, but coming into that season, Red Sox were coming off a 500-year fifth place, 18 and a half games back in 1985. So things didn't look like they'd change under manager John McNamara. Can you comment about that?
Yeah, that was an interesting era. First of all, sports in Boston were going through. We had the Celtics were very good. The Bruins were like a meddler, and the Patriots, early 80s, struggled after Chuck Fairbanks had left, and they rebounded this 85-86. So to be honest with you, the 85-86 year, really, that was one of the great years in New England sports, if not for the last 20 years. We would still be talking about, the Celtics winning a championship, the Red Sox being one strike away from winning a championship, and the Patriots going to the Super Bowl. Of course, two heartbreaking losses. The heartbreaking wasn't the football game. But look, 85, there were not a lot of expectations in 86. And the wait till next year, we were saying that like a week into the season, I think, early in. We had no idea. They made a lot of moves we talk about, and in the end, those moves were phenomenal. And there were leaders, there was young talent, and again, if the Red Sox had pulled this out, this 1986 season out, this would have been one of the greatest years or greatest teams in Boston Red Sox history. So much to love about this team, and I could talk about this team. So that was early in my career. So this is 1986. I was just turned 25 at the time. So I was a kid. I'm double that. Well, no, more than double that. Sorry. And I've seen a lot. So I look back and I'm able to basically understand the angst where we were. Because that was as ugly as it was. I can remember, the 2007 Patriots loss, because I think there was they had won before, but that was going to be perfection. This was different. This was the Red Sox. And we all know the Red Sox, they ran the show here for more than 50 years. Even when the Celtics and Bruins were sort of turning things, even when Bobby Orr was here. I can't say even when Bobby Orr was here, but you get the point is the Red Sox drove the city.
Absolutely. It was a baseball town, right? A drinking town with a baseball problem, right? So they make a couple of acquisitions. One is they trade one of their lefty starters, Bobby Ojeda, to the New York Mets, ironically. You can talk about Ojeda and the trade for Calvin Schiraldi, Wes Gardner, and Lachelle Tarver. Let's do a whole show on Lachelle Tarver.
Wow. So what a trade that was. And Ojeda was decent. In fact, he had a better career with the Mets. He was sort of disappointing here. Schiraldi had the makings. If he didn't, again, I blame us. I blame Boston for really screwing this kid up, because they threw him in. I mean, they threw this kid, and that's what baseball. It's funny. It's the interesting part about baseball. You throw someone into a situation they're not really prepared for. And I'm not even talking the World Series. I'm talking the Red Sox World Series. And then it doesn't go the right way, and you sort of get blamed, or you've got to live with pitches you've thrown. People remember that 20 years later. They still bring up the pitches. And Schiraldi is the kind of guy who won't even come to Boston anymore. He doesn't even want to talk about it here. So we are tough, man. But Schiraldi was a talent. Schiraldi was, I'm telling you, he showed us early on, is this what we got this guy for the next 10, 12 years? The Red Sox, I mean, I guess he's a bullpen guy. Maybe he's a starter. He started some in college, but I love that trade. Wes Gardner, not going to call him great, but rock solid reliever. Sort of a setup, more of a setup guy. So that trade, that was part of like 3 or 4 moves in the general manager's seat that sent this team trending in the right direction.
And then just before they broke camp, they traded one of my favorite players during their hard-hitting left-hander, a DH for DH, essentially, Mike EASLER for Don Baylor.
Yes. So now, of course, John, you're talking like all fans. We don't like to let go of players we love. And EASLER was exciting. He smiled a lot. He slapped the ball over the monster, had that, it's almost like, today if a hitter did what he did, it throw, that'd be looked at as what, you're pimping. He pimped everything, and especially went over the monster. Very likable guy. Was not a popular trade, but it was the right trade in essence. Don Baylor comes over, and he's near the end. Obviously, he had played with the Angels some, and but Don was a leader. Don was a power hitter. They needed more consistent power. EASLER was sort of like red hot for a month, and then sort of, I don't want to say disappeared, but wasn't really quote unquote that power guy, and that's what Baylor was. And in essence, that trade that gave the Red Sox some professionalism. And looking back, very easy to have 20/20 vision, but I compare what these couple of trades did, really that trade, to what the Red Sox did by bringing in Schilling and Ortiz, who was, obviously a little lucky that they got him. They signed him as a cheap free agent. But you bring in key players that aren't intimidated by playing in Boston and the Yankees. And that's the problem. Baylor wasn't afraid of the Yankees. And look, you were brought up, I was brought up of the Yankees are coming. All right, I'm scared. And that's how we grew up. You know what? Don Baylor wasn't afraid of the Yankees. Guess what? Curt Schilling wasn't afraid of the Yankees. And that's really interesting, because I think you got to add flavor, even when you win. You have to add every year or two, couple of years. You got to add something like a Don Baylor. And that was a great. I mean, he wasn't here long, but great find.
And like you said, at the end of his career, he was a 5-tooler, and he was down to a 2-tooler. Actually, a 1-tooler. He could only hit for power at the end. But yeah, he led the team in homers, 31, even though he hit low 230s. But as you said, a clubhouse presence, totally different player, a different attitude, perhaps, the 25 cabs thing with the Boston Red Sox. So they start off the season in April, and Roger Clemens goes out and has one of the most incredible evenings ever with a 20 strikeout game. If you could talk about that.
Yeah, that was an amazing feat. And I think that was a Sunday night, I believe. And I think I was at the Patriots. Remember, the Patriots had gone to the Super Bowl the year before. So, but the Patriots were still a team to beat. And it was, I seem to recall, it was a late Sunday, and we were all watching the game, I believe, in a press box. All the media went, because it was a cold, chilly night, and against Seattle, and he was that was really, but he was showing signs of that, all throughout the season. That was the surprise. We knew we were getting a very good pitcher. We didn't know we were getting a Hall of Famer, and he that night, that was as dominant as I've ever seen a pitcher. And I think Pedro over the Yankees was the closest that I saw, but it was incredible. It was an incredible game, an incredible night, and it was a night I'll never forget.
And Clemens, of course, would go on. We thought he was over, and that was his breakout year, 24-4 that season. He was phenomenal. Went to the All-Star game, started the All-Star game, won the Cy Young and the MVP too. What a dominating year, and it shows, Bill, that if you have one stopper like that, he can take you a long way in baseball.
Well, it's not so much the stopper, but yes, because that guy is always going to stop a losing streak. But then I think what we see is we talk about Bruce Hurst, who he wasn't a star, but he was a top of the rotation guy. He was a number 2 on a great team. And you know what? He was a number 2 to Clemens. Ended up he had a better postseason than Clemens that year, but you add him, and then you get a guy like Nipper, and all of a sudden it doesn't have to be 4 Hall of Famers like the Orioles had in the 70s, but this all of a sudden you got the stopper, and then you got a guy who is a stopper 3 out of 4 times, and then you can add a guy like Nipper who's 3rd or 4th, and you add pitchers who really belong in the back of rotation. When Nipper was the 2nd pitcher, or even some days he was their best pitcher, you're in trouble. And what that did, that allowed Clemens it's funny, when you have a Clemens, you know you're never going to lose. Probably you're going to win that game. But then you felt that way with Hurst. Okay, all of a sudden you only have 3 more games. You win 1 or 2 of those, you're winning every series. Almost every series you play, and you're going to be a contender. And it's really 2 great pitchers, and they had 2 great pitchers.
Right, and let's not forget. So Hurst wins 13 games. He leads the team in ERA. Nipper was never a Nipper fan. Sorry, 10 and 12, 5.36. For some reason, there are guys like that aren't good pitchers, but the team hits for them and they get these wins.
Oil Can too.
That's what I wanted to talk about. Oil Can came off a 15-win season in '85. To me, he's throwback. And I got to know him over the years, as you have, and he has 2 dogs named Satchel and Paige, but he's a throwback to the Negro Leagues. I truly believe in reincarnation. Sometime way back in the South where he grew up in Mississippi, he's just old-time baseball. I love the guy. But he was off to a great start in '86, and tell me, didn't he get upset because he was snubbed for the All-Star game?
He was snubbed he was snubbed for the All-Star game, and then he was snubbed in Game 7 of the World Series. But yes, he look. The reason why I liked him, he didn't throw it as hard as we all thought he did, but he competed. He threw the ball inside. He looked at every outing as if his reputation was on the line. You remind me of Dave Stewart, who threw the ball a little harder, probably a little bit better. But yeah, and when I was talking about, I would absolutely put Oil Can above Nipper, which gives you 3, 4. Like I said, you got a very good staff. But Oil Can was a number 3 on a great team. He was not a number 1, and he was a number 1, basically a number 1 fighting with Hurst. And I'll say fighting per se, but yeah, I loved Oil Can because he competed, and he came to play every night. He was a little crazy. But you know what? That's you don't get to where you are, and he would throw forever. He could throw at 150 pitches. He was old school, like you said. He's Satchel Paige, basically. Perfect name for his dogs. But I was a big fan of his. I just liked that he sort of we talk about some of these players that represent Boston. I know we talk about racial issues back then, but he did represent Boston. He came to play every single night, and the fans loved him.
Absolutely. And then the bullpen, not the best bullpen. You had Stanley, as we are going to talk about, 16 saves. Schiraldi had 9, and Joe Sambito 12. But these guys, high ERAs, and they really didn't pitch that many innings either, Bill. So they really depended on the top of their rotation, their 4 starters, and then the guys they brought up, including Tim Lawler and Sellers and stuff like that. But
that's bullpen. Every team has a couple of those guys. Look, Sambito was huge. He was huge, and he was different. He was a sidewinder, not only a lefty, but a sidewinder. But look, I will say this again. Bob Stanley is one of the most underappreciated players in Boston. I don't want to say Boston sports history per se, but just this guy was not appreciated. He was the old school reliever. He was Raleigh Fingers. He was 4 innings, 3 innings, 2 innings, 2 outs. He could do it all. His sinker was painful. Batters hated it. It hurt your hands when you fouled the ball off. And in my opinion, again, you can't go by numbers for him. And I know his stats that year weren't great. It was, 4.37 ERA, 54 strikeouts in 82 innings. That's not great, but that wasn't what he was. He was a ground ball pitcher. And but today, and I don't want to compare him to quote unquote the side under the guys that throw from the ground there, those crazy dudes that nobody wants to face. Stanley was a guy nobody wanted to face because he also, he threw it hard, and it was a hard sinker, and guys didn't like it.
Right. And so their pitching staff, though, going into it got hot late in the year, and as you said, Bruce Hurst really proved himself behind Clemens. You were going to get a win behind Clemens, and then somebody like Al Nipper had to be the fourth starter, and he did his job as well. But looking at the as they're coming towards the All-Star break, they're competing, and they send Wade Boggs, who would go on to win, I believe, his fourth consecutive batting title. Roger Clemens was started. Bill Buckner, I believe, would go. Rich Gedman and Jim Rice. So they had some decent players. Gedman, I think, had his best year. Let's talk about him. Rich Gedman, the lefty, the local boy.
Yeah, I mean, Gedman was like for a catcher, because catchers aren't really, other than Fisk and Bench, catchers were there to catch. And Gedman came up, wasn't a great hitter early. He worked, but he was like Boggs, underrated in the field. Boggs, who ended up lousy, stone hands third baseman technically when he came up, to one of the best third basemen in the league. Solid, didn't cover a lot of ground, but made plays and became a good third baseman. Same could be said for Gedman as a hitter. Didn't come up as a hitter, came up as a catcher, and ended up being, a weapon offensively. And this year, this was a solid year for Geddy. 258 with 16 homers. That's very good for a catcher. 135 games. He was only 26 then, and so this was in the middle. He had a couple more good years after this too, but very solid. It's almost like since Fisk, this was really the best catcher they've had since Fisk, and he was. And I'm talking all the way around. And the local, in fact, there is a local guy, Worcester guy, and I was a big Gedman fan because it's not easy to play here in Boston, period. But being from here, it doesn't work. Tony Canigliaro, it was the only guy that I know that made it here, and Geddy was the only one where in the end it got tough on him later in his career here. People got on him for his swing and Walter Eniak, which I disagree with 100%. But Geddy was also a good catcher. The pitchers loved throwing to him.
Right. And Boggs, Hall of Famer, as you said, worked really, really hard. One of the greatest hitter in Red Sox history, in my opinion, in all deference to Teddy Ballgame. But he worked hard at his craft at third base. He came up as a first baseman. People forget that. And putting him batting second behind Dwight Evans as your leadoff hitter in that lineup. You spoke about Wade Boggs, but that type of putting him second, I guess, it was like a second leadoff hitter. I was a Dwight Evans fan, but I think that Dwight Evans was playing a lot for Dwight Evans, and he was part of that 25 Cabs thing. And, I guess he and Bill Lee got in a fight because he would hang around with Yaz, me and my shadow, or something like that. But that lineup with Evans leading off, followed by Boggs, and then you get into the heart of the order with Buckner, who had 102 RBIs, and Jimmy Rice, who's in the twilight of his career, even though it's only his 11th season, he leads the team with 110 RBI. So that was quite a potent batting lineup.
Yeah, that was a very good lineup. So I'm going to disagree with you on Evans because this team, when we talk about it's about pitching, we always got to say it's pitching. But we're talking Buckner, we're talking Boggs, we're talking Rice, and we're talking Evans, Baylor. We're talking 5 considerations for the Hall of Fame. I'm not saying they're Hall of Famers, but they're all guys that are considered. Look, Baylor wasn't a Hall of Famer, but Evans, close. Buckner, close. Not saying they are, but you know what? They're grinders. I mean, remember, Evans started the season off with a home run against Jack Morris in Detroit. The first pitch of the season in Major League Baseball, Evans starts it with a home run against, in my opinion, the horse of that era. Clemens and Jack Morris, who thankfully just went into the Hall of Fame, in my opinion. So, look, don't underscore the Red Sox lineup here. This was meaty. Now, when you look at the stats, it wasn't 7 guys with 100 RBIs, but it was 7 guys with 70, 80 RBIs. And it started with Boggs, because I believe Boggs was the machine. Boggs is a machine. He wasn't a human being. And, you know, he could have personal problems, and he had them here. But guess what? When he was in the batter's box, nothing else mattered. And so this lineup, elite. And this is with a shortstop, Eddie Romero, Ray Quinones. You know, shortstop was never a really important position here. On this particular, compared to '78 when Burleson was there. But this lineup was studly.
Absolutely. And again, you said we had 200 RABI guys, Evans 97, Baylor 94. That is a potent lineup. And he would go on to be the ALCS MVP at second baseman, little Marty Barrett.
Yeah, and Marty Barrett was the fire plug. You know, sort of Jerry Remy, little, you know, maybe a little better hitter. I can't say that, but Marty Barrett was just the perfect guy you don't pay attention to on a really good team. So on a really good roster, Marty Barrett is dangerous because Marty Barrett goes the opposite way. He also would pull it if he had to. Smart hitter, would foul off balls. So it's like it's part of, you know, on a bad team, Marty Barrett's going to be, I don't want to say useless, but Marty Barrett's importance drops a lot. But on this team, I got to be honest with you. I was a big Marty Barrett. Hits 286 and 60 RBIs. And you know what? I'm not saying great, but a good second baseman.
Absolutely. And in center field, people forget we had Tony Harmless.
Well, we had a couple of years of, you know, this was not one of his great years. He was injured for a while, but he was a 40 homer guy here. And I mean, you think of that roster with, you know, Armas, Rice, and Evans. That for a couple of years, that was the most potent offensive outfield in the majors by far. We're talking over 120 homers, I think, 2 years with those two. So look, this was not his big year, which we have other guys that came in, and, you know, Dave Henderson was here for a reason. You know, if Armas was Armas, I think we probably, you know, we wouldn't know who Dave Henderson was, but that's part of what made this team great. There were a couple of sneaky additions, and I got to give credit. To our general manager. That was as important that year, the general manager, as any person on the field, because this was a new team. This was a new team. Usually takes a couple of years to come together. They came together immediately.
And you're talking about Lou Gorman.
Lou Gorman. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
We're going to help the ball club. I think we believe he can help the ball club, and I think that's why we picked him up. He'll help the ball club. So June 29th, let's talk about that trade. The guy goes on to win 311 career games. We trade him for Steve Drop His Pants Lyons. He was my very first interview ever as a journalist in 1985. But talk about Tom Seaver.
So it's funny. I talked to Wade Boggs. When before Seaver had passed, it was announced that he had dementia and was struggling, and it wasn't good because he hadn't been to the Hall of Fame. And Wade Boggs, they only played that one half season together, but Wade would sit next to him on the bus, traveling to games on the road, and he said, "I learned more about professionalism and about how to act, how to treat people." And look, Tom Seaver had a little ego too, and it wasn't like he was a perfect guy. Look, Wade Boggs' ego had an ego, but he basically learned. He said, "I just learned how to be a professional, like at the highest level." I'd watch him get off the bus, carry his bag. He would tell me, "Hey, you know, this is." You know, watch how, you know, you're in the box, you're rushing a little bit. So he would help even the hitter, even though Tom Seaver couldn't hit a paper bag with a canoe paddle. He basically, I think early on, solid pitcher, didn't do anything outstanding, didn't really help them in the end, but gave them another, like Don Baylor, some professionalism. And you know, the Red Sox, you got to remember, these were ugly times, and me, were as negative and as doubtful as we could be with this team. And so We always were, and I always was my childhood. I was afraid of Yankees. I hated Mickey Rivers. I think if I saw Mickey Rivers, and I could get away with murdering him right now, and no one would know, I think he'd be dead. And I met him once, and I told him that. He'd laugh. But Craig Nettles. So that's what we grew up on. And I always looked at them as better than us as a kid. And you know what? They were, but it was a mentality. And it's, as we found out from guys like David Ortiz, Kurt Schilling, no, I'm not afraid of nobody. And you know what? That's the attitude here in Boston right now. We are the Yankees, and I say Boston, and I'm talking Boston, the city, the region, teams. It's no way to go through life being afraid.
Absolutely. Great story about Seaver. And you mentioned he only had 16 starts, won 5 games, but he put up Seaver-like numbers in terms of the strikeout ratio. He didn't make the postseason roster. Did he have a dead arm? What was the story behind that?
He wasn't healthy. No, I think it was his knee.
His knee,
but
that's right.
He wasn't healthy the last month, and it was not. I don't even think it was a close call.
So the Red Sox, they win 21 games in May. Outstanding. They're in first place. Then they acquire Tom Seaver, and they start to stumble. I think they go 10-17, I believe, in July. And it's getting now, here come the Red Sox again folding. They went 10-16 in July. And it's now August 17th, and they make a big deal with Seattle. Can you talk about that trade?
So, Dave Henderson, correct? And Spike Owen. And so, again, why would they bring in Dave Henderson? Well, Armas was injured, and he wasn't 100% healthy. In fact, for most of the year, and they needed depth. And they realized, look, the Red Sox were in first place. I think from April, I think late or early May, they were in first place the entire way. Now it got hairy a couple of times, but now we're talking the Red Sox are making moves to win a World Series, and we're not used to that. But we have the best pitcher in baseball. Well, you could argue the Mets had the best pitcher in baseball in Dwight Gooden, who again, I would say Dwight Gooden was maybe one smidgen ahead of Clemens, but it was close. Two of the best young pitchers. So all of a sudden they hadn't had a Clemens. So in Boston we had hitters, and on this team we had hitters and elite pitching at the top. And so I think this was a great move. And again, he did nothing. Dave Henderson did absolutely nothing.
196 he hit, and Owen hit 183.
Yeah. So both of them were I don't want to say worthless, but they were. I didn't expect anything out of them. But again, it was more just having the depth, and that's what we've learned here over the last 20 years. Bill Belichick, I think, taught us this more than anyone: is depth. You just don't win with 5 or 6 guys, and I think Red Sox teams over the previous 60 years, 65 years, had stars, but their secondary talent didn't match up with the Yankees, who had not 2 superstars, but 4 superstars, and then 3 borderline Hall of Famers. And that's what this Red Sox team had. They had 6 or 7 borderline Hall of Famers playing still at a very high level.
And they did plug the shortstop issue. You mentioned they had, what was it, Gutierrez in 85. Then they brought in Ray Quinones, and he was hitting pretty well. Yep. And Eddie Romero was their best bat off the bench at 210. So they had no bench. And finally, Owen gave them a solid everyday shortstop, switcher, I believe, right? Or was he? Yeah, he was.
Yes, he was.
And then Henderson, boy, we didn't know how good he would be until the Red Sox clinched the division, and now they're taking on in the ALCS. There wasn't ALDS back then. It was they take on the California Angels, and that was quite a run in terms of the Angels win Game 1, Bill, 8-1 behind Witt, and they really rack up Clemens in the second inning with 4 runs, and it didn't look good. I remember that game.
No, all of a sudden Clemens is a choker, and it's like, here we go again, and that was a very good Angels team too. Remember, Reggie Jackson on the back end, but he killed the Red Sox. He had a couple very good games. Red Sox. The Red Sox were, I believe, more talented team, but all of a sudden we look and it's, they had that big extra innings game, which was game 4 in Anaheim, and all of a sudden it's 3-1, and it's over. It's over, probably, and that's the way we thought. And I remember saying, well, you know what? I thought this Red Sox team was great, and I did. I thought this team in September. I said, you know what? This is a World Series team. This is a '75 team, which I thought was the World Series team. And go ahead.
Yeah, you're right. It's because I remember hearing booing at Fenway Park when the Sox got blown out 8-1. The next day, HURST won, so they went 1-1. But when they went out to California and Candelaria beat Oil Can in Game 3, and as you're talking about, Game 4, that won 3-6-9, that went 11 innings before California won. You walk away, okay, it's over. What a disappointment. Same old Red Sox. And then at 3-1, it's obvious that we're done. And then comes Game 5 in California, because they went 2-3-2 back then, right? And talk about that game and the Sox with 3 home runs in that game. Baylor, Gedman, and then, of course, the shot that made history. Can you talk about that game?
That was amazing because they were 1 strike away. They were 1 strike away, the Angels. Now, the Angels, had never won a World Series, ever, at the time. And so that was huge for them because they brought Reggie in, and it was like that was finally, Gritch. That team basically was ready. The Senseis was, I think, third base. So, yeah, that team was ready to win a World Series, and they were go to a World Series. And I think, look, first of all, we got to say, on the other side, Houston and the Mets, you could make an argument those are the 2 best teams in baseball. Remember, the Mets were the best team in baseball that year. Houston had, like, the best pitching staff in baseball. But over on our side, hitters, 8-6, 7-5. We're getting a lot of those crazy games. And so Dave Henderson, it's over. It is over. And, the crazy thing was that didn't win the game. But he hits the home run, and it's literally that lit up Boston. So, Dave Roberts stealing second base. Okay, Dave Roberts, the irony is, didn't play in 1 game, didn't get 1 at bat in the playoffs that run. He went in twice to pinch run, but he stole that base. So forever he never has to buy a beer here in Boston, even if he beats the Red Sox in a World Series, maybe. But so look, Dave Henderson, that was clutch, and he had that attitude about him though. He didn't care. He just didn't care. I talked to him 5 years after I did a 5-year anniversary piece, and he lived out in Seattle. That's where he made his home full time. And he just said, you guys in Boston, you're all just so tense and scared. And I play baseball. I have fun. I'm not scared. And it was like, takes me back to Schilling and Don Baylor. You need guys like that, especially, we're a very strong, we're Puritans, we're negative. We find the negative in all the fun. And Dave Henderson showed us a way. But again, that game was crazy because then the Angels come back and tie it. And, it's like the Red Sox then have to do it all over again. Then it's like, oh, here we go. They told you, this was just a farce. Who knows? Dave Henderson's going to disappear.
Yep. And didn't he hurt his knee when he did that little jump?
Yeah.
He hurt his knee, didn't he?
Never was the same again.
Wow.
Yeah, ACL, slight sprain. But it bothered him for the rest of his career.
Just for that leap after the home run. Wow. Wow.
That was a good leap.
It was a good leap, well deserved. So now it's 3-2. They win in extra innings, and then Oil. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so this is where we we find the negative. This is, in my opinion, because remember, the Angels weren't the Yankees. It was over after that. Just like the ball gets through Buckner, the way we looked at it, the way the Mets looked at it, was it's over. And it wasn't over. You still have more games to play. You still have more time on the clock. Still, you have another game. But it was over. Plus, you knew Clemens and Clemens and who pitched Game 7 for the Red Sox?
Game 7 for the Red Sox in the ALCS was Clemens. Yeah. Boyd went the 6th game.
So Boyd went the 6th. So it's like
back home.
So it was like, all right, now it's Boyd and Clemens. We're quote unquote, we're going to win this. The Red Sox are going to win this. And yeah, 10-4. And Clemens, got to give him credit, was on his game in Game 7. And they're not coming to Boston, and the Angels are not going to beat the Red Sox. Yankees, different story. The Angels are not going to beat the Red Sox. And got to give the Red Sox credit. That was awesome. That was an awesome 2 games there in Boston. Exciting.
And I think I agree. Once they won, made it 3-2 coming back to Boston, everybody had that feeling of confidence with them. And they 16 hits, I think they had in Game 6. So we were slapping it all around the yard. And then Clemens shut them down Game 7. And then we take on the New York Mets, as you mentioned. What an outstanding pitcher. And then, of course, our own Bobby Ojita's coming back against us.
Yeah. He had a great year. He had a very good year, and he became like a leader on that team. He was a great addition for the Mets as well, and he had a great run there with the Mets. But remember, it's in New York, and this is the
Game
Red Sox
1
have these 2 great games against the Angels, and they just continue it with 2 impressive wins against the Mets. And I got 1-0. That first game was amazing, absolutely
HURST.
And then Game 2 was crazy, but they, Red Sox, I think close for a little bit. And 9, was it something like 9-3?
9-3, correct. 18 hits for the Red Sox.
So all of a sudden, 2-0, and the Mets, the Red Sox are coming home for 3 games. So, what we're saying here in Boston. Now the Mets hadn't done anything, quote unquote, as a franchise since the '69 team. So it was like, all right, again, this is not the Yankees.
And again, we have Tom Seaver. It all ties together somehow.
Yes, but they come to Boston, and who leads off the game? Game 3. Lenny Dykstra, home run, first at bat. Wow. And I don't know if it was the first pitch, but it set a tone for these guys are not going away. They're you know what? They were the best team during the regular season, and they had a tough series against Houston, and they're not going away. They were like dirty dirt dogs, like unlikable. New York loved them. The Mets loved them. They loved them in Queens. But I got to give them credit. That's how they opened the next game, and we had a dogfight.
Yep, 4-run first in Game 3. They go on to win 7-1. Game 4 in Boston now, so it's 2-1. And this one here, they run up against Ron Darling, and of course the guy that I spoke about, Al Nipper. Mismatch.
Yep. Look, Darling went to Yale, local guy. He lived in from the Worcester area. Worcester, Mass. Went to Yale, All-American. Didn't happen often in the Ivy League, but tough pitcher. Reminds me sort of like a Mike Messina kind of pitcher. Was not explosive, but always on both sides of the plate, and ball tailed away to lefties, which is always tough for a righty. So also had a little sinker. So look, that was, I don't want to say a total mismatch, but it was 4. So it was 6-2, and I look, Nipper never really showed us anything or got a chance to in the World Series. He had a chance to, as we saw in Game 7, but that was big because then it got them back. It got the Mets back in it.
Yep.
And so all of a sudden now it's 2-2 and at Fenway. And you know what? Again, as a kid, I'm a young writer per se, but I'm looking at this like, all right, this is going to be a war. But you know what? It should be. This is the World Series. It's not the Yankees, it's the Mets. But this is again, the Yankees, the Mets had 5 or 6 guys that you considered Hall of Fame talents. You know, we're talking Darryl Strawberry, who's one of the who was basically called Ted Williams in high school, and then Dwight Gooden. I will say this: the most talented pitcher I've ever seen who failed because of drugs and alcohol.
Yep.
Unhittable, unbelievable curveball, that rising fastball that hitters couldn't keep away from. Didn't walk many people. You know, he was quote unquote even a little more explosive than maybe Clemens was. I don't want to say better than Clemens. Clemens was a stud too, but sad. But again, and the Red Sox got to him. They got to him a little bit. And but again, the Red Sox. This was a great. Ended up looking back. You look at the roster. Great Red Sox team. All the way around.
Absolutely. So game 4, as you mentioned, Darling wins behind Lenny Dykstra's second home run of the series. Gary Carter hits a pair too. Great hitter as well, former Expo. So the series is tied. They go to game 5, and back comes Hurst, and he spins a gem, beating Dwight Gooden 4-2 the final.
That was
awesome.
That
game.
Awesome game. Red Sox got to Gooden, as I recall, but Hurst was amazing. That year, and that year, I mean, not only going on 3 days rest a couple of times, but it just having him behind Clemens was that's as good as it gets. I will say this. I'll look back. You look at the Red Sox in 2004. Pedro and Schilling. I guess you'd have to go with that. Number 1 and number 2, or you could even flip them around that year per se. But Clemens and Hurst that year, for my money, that's only maybe second to Schilling and Pedro, which I think Pedro was a better pitcher overall. But that was elite. And it's funny. It's like having a goalie in hockey. The confidence it allows you to play with as a hitter. You get 3 runs, you're probably going to win the game when they pitch. So again, and you got to give Hurst credit. He was locked in. He was locked in the entire playoffs that year.
Absolutely. And ironically, you mentioned Schilling. He's drafted or he signed in '86 as well. So it's game 5 at Fenway Park. Red Sox are up 3-2, and it's October 25th, 1986. Red Sox take a 2-0 lead into the 5th inning. The Mets tie it. And then let's go into the game. First of all, Dave Henderson would hit his second home run, but it's a battle of the relievers. Their closer's Rick Aguilera, and we got Calvin. Can you talk about game 6 and how it unfolded?
Yeah, so it really looked like the curse was over. And Evans did Evans have the big hit too? The Red Sox just that game, they had a toughness about them that game, and it was like it took me back to game, I guess, 5 against the Angels, but that was the Red Sox the entire year. They were in first place the entire season, from May 2nd or 3rd on. So I was impressed, and when they went up 1 run, then 2 runs, we celebrated early. But,
I was Bill, and then we did, and then so I remember when it happened. We'll talk about that in just a moment. I was reaching into a cooler at my friend's back porch, looking through the window when that happened. But it was a great game. It's tied. They go into extra innings. Sox get 2 runs, and they're leading 5-3. Right. Bottom of the 10th, celebration time.
Yeah, and it was they were celebrating. They were all pumped up, and but here's the deal: 2 outs, nobody on, 2 strikes, and that's the great part about this game of baseball. The toughest out is the last one. The toughest strike is the last one. The Mets were good. They didn't have a history. They were a bunch of bad boys. They ended up, half of them were drinking and on drugs. We later find out, but they weren't afraid, and so that's what it takes to overcome those situations. And I'll go back to the ninth inning when they bring in Bob Stanley, but Carter, a big at bat and a big single, and it's like still all right. Well, first and third, or nothing's going to happen here. All you do is just get one more out. And I've told this story because Joe Morgan told me the story. He was the bullpen coach at the time, and he said he had told McNamara the inning before, we got to get Stanley in the game. His sinker is biting like I've never seen it bite before. Now, Stanley was, the local guy, and he was on, and they were going to win, and he was going to come in and just finish the job. And and I will say, remember they gave up a hit to go 5-4, and the tying run was, I think we forget sometimes, but it was on the pass ball or wild pitch. What do we call that? Stanley gets blamed for it, but it was catchable. It wasn't it didn't bounce a foot in front of the plate. I think it was right about near the plate, but that's the way his ball was biting that day, and that tied the game up. So, being from Boston, once the game was tied, it's like, are you kidding me? We did it again, and what you're doing right now, yes, hands to the face, head down, and up comes Mookie.
And let's talk about that. Buckner had 14 errors that year. A lot of errors for a first baseman. Was not a good defensive first baseman. Had to put his ankles in ice buckets. Both of them couldn't run. But coming off back-to-back 100 RBI seasons, we got him for Eckersley, the starter in '84 from Chicago, and there was cries that he should have put in Dave Stapleton in his 158 batting average or whatever it was, as he had done. But I think that what McNamara wanted to do is because Billy Bucks had taken them all that way, that he deserved to be on the field if they were to win. But it was a cruel fate. He was blamed for something that wasn't his fault. In my opinion, and we've all watched it, Bill, hundreds of times, I think Wilson would have beat that ball out. You watch his shadow, he exploded out of the batter's box. Whether he made the play or not, I think Wilson's on. So let's talk about that.
Okay, so I don't know about that. I will say, because Wilson was running, Buckner rushed it a little bit. And by rushed it, I mean probably lifted his head up. If you see his glove, what happens is his glove is down, but for some reason his glove is closed when the ball goes by it. Like, I don't know if he misread the hop or whatever. I mean, it literally it touched the side of the glove. It didn't go under his glove. It went to the right of his glove, looking at home plate. And yes, it would have been close. And Buckner shouldn't have been in, but John McNamara. First of all, John McNamara hated young players, loved veterans. And, there's great stories about Jody Reed, a little later on, Jody, I'm sending you down. And Joe Morgan loved young players. So it was, they had a different attitude. And, Reed flourished under Morgan, couldn't play under McNamara because McNamara pressured. He hated young players. Hate's a strong word, but you understand my point. And Stapleton should have been in. Stapleton had replaced Buckner in every late game defensively. Now, what do you think Bill Belichick would have done with that? Would he have said, well, I want Bill Buckner out there? No. Bill Buckner, I want to win the World Series. And he'll celebrate like the rest of us. Will run on the field or crawl on the field because he couldn't run. So that was a mistake. That being said, the score was tied. So the game, it wasn't like the game was lost. When that went through, the series wasn't over. They still had another game. But in Boston, it's over. At least that's how we feel. And I don't mean blame. Bill Buckner suffered a cruel fate. And, that's a separate story altogether. That guy gave every ounce of blood to baseball, to the Red Sox. He was a different cat, man. He was serious. He didn't really joke around a lot. Loved the game, and he lived up where he lived in Andover, and so we had a little relationship. Our newspaper, the publisher of the paper, no longer the publisher, lived next door to him, so we had a relationship to him. He did a diary for our newspaper during the World Series.
Wow, I didn't know that.
So how about this? He did a diary that night after the game. And the guy, he was a step front guy. I mean, Dwight Evans, 90% of the team, talk about the Cavs, took off. Dwight Evans faced the crowd. He was there. He answered the questions. It was like 2 or 3 guys. And so, look, I feel for Buckner because he felt and it wasn't just that night. It was more of the next 20 years, the next 15 years. It wasn't really, the blame sort of carried after they lost the World Series. That's when we started blaming people. We are quick to blame people in Boston, but I'll say it again. It wasn't over. We had another game to go here, but that's not how we look at it here in Boston with the Red Sox.
Right. And as you said, Bill, the game was 2 days. There was an off day before Game 7. And
it rained out. It was a rain day. Yeah.
Okay, it was a rain out. So that it had to stew inside them for another day or so. Just one last thing on Billy Bucks. When he came up with the Dodgers, he was a center fielder, could run like the wind, and had the ankle issues. But I always forgave him. I played first base when I was playing ball, and that's happened to me, going right through the wickets. And there might have been a pebble there. Who knows? But they go into Game 7. Everybody has that impending feeling of doom. October 27th. Red Sox, if you could just talk about the setup of that game. And the Sox got on the scoreboard, Billy, in the second inning, putting up a crooked number.
Well, no, the big story was Oil Can Boyd was supposed to start the game. But then when we got the extra day, it got Bruce Hurst another day's rest. So Bruce Hurst was named the starter. And, talk about livid. Oil Can was public about it, cried. That was a big story. He was very upset. And but yeah, it was the right decision because Bruce Hurst was on his game. And guess what? He was to start the World Series, set Game 7 as well. So Red Sox start, and all of a sudden, again, it was a little early. No, it was very early. I think everyone knew was it a 3-0 lead? So they jump out to a 3-0 lead, and it's like, okay, all right, maybe they're going to win this thing. Maybe. And Bruce Hurst tired, and that was only natural. He was on short rest, and then it really, the roof caved in.
Yep.
And Al Nipper, your good friend, Al Nipper came in, and we needed Al to put out the fire. And unfortunately, I think Al brought a gasoline can.
Yeah, and the Mets tie it in the bottom of the 6th with 3.
Yep.
Bottom of the 7th, they tack on 2 more, and we're done. And they do 2 more in the 9th. You could just hear the gasping and the sorrow, the sobbing of Boston. You could hear after Game 7.
Yeah, that was. But it was, again, I'll say it. We as a region had basically given up after Game 6, and so it wasn't like the Red Sox might come back in the 7th or 8th inning or 9th inning. Nope.
Yep.
It was Game 6 was it. It was over. You know what it was? It wasn't so much they won't come back, but it was over. Remember, the champagne was already in the Red Sox locker room, clubhouse, and all the plastic was up. They were done. The trophy was in there. Talk about jinxing. I had a good friend of mine, Steve Notarangelo, and he's got a bottle of champagne, and he mistakenly shook it a little too much. So the cork popped. This is in the you want to blame anyone? He's Steve Notarangelo. He's right now he's in Rockland, Massachusetts. I'm going to send him a note, by the way. And so the champagne pops, and I at the time, I didn't cover this weekend's games. I go, what are you doing? And the champagne, and he goes, oh, it was a mistake. He goes, no, you start shaking it. I'm cocky. It's over. Start shaking it. So Steve Naringel, if you want to blame anyone, blame him. I went to high school with Steve, 1979, Quincy High. So
yep.
It was over.
Yep.
It was over when the Mets were, all of a sudden, it was a runaway train when they tied it up in the 6th. And they got to Hurst. Hurst got tired. And then Nipper was, I think Strawberry hit the home run against Nipper, and it was over.
Yep. So the Sox, it was a desperate time. Like you said, it could have been such a great year. What the Celtics had done, the Pats had gone to Super Bowl 20. Bruins signed John Carter.
Yes, right.
I mean, the Bruins were in a mess then in '86. It's just before the Neely acquisition. But Bill, I want to thank you for joining us, talking about the 1986 Boston Red Sox. Thanks so much. You're from the Eagle Tribune. Love your articles. Again, you've been a mainstay in Boston press for years, and I love your history. And I just want to thank you for joining me on Then It Was a Game.
John, I thank you very much. I will say this Red Sox team, so here's how I've gotten older and wiser. I'm going to use the word wiser. I have come to appreciate this 86 team more as the years have gone on. What I've come to find out in all this winning we've done here the last 2 decades is it's really not the winning, it's the trying to win. And I think we get lost in awful season. Patriots lose a Super Bowl. Belichick's depressed. Brady won't talk, and the season is a disaster. And I just don't like looking at it that way. I look at things differently now, probably because we've quote unquote we have won. My son only knows championships. What's going on? How are they not the #1 seed in the playoffs? Well, that's the way it was for 40 years for me, son. You're going to have to get used to it. But I appreciate this 86. That was a fun team. And, as opposed to the Mets, which had misfits, the Red Sox were very classy team. And I've come to respect how great they were. The saddest part is the way Buckner was treated for the next 15 years after that, and had to move away. Very disappointing. The way we treat people, which I think is a Boston, New England thing, which I don't think is great. I think we still have a little of that in us. But this 86 team, thank you. Thank you. I know it wasn't great. I know Al Nipper probably should have been a little better, but I had a lot of fun following this team, and I appreciate them more as time has gone on.
Great. And I appreciate you taking the time with us on Then It Was a Game. Thank you so much, Bill Burt. I'm John Horrigan. Take care, everybody.